It will not surprise you to learn that white evangelical megachurches have spent years and years politicizing the Bible. But one of the things atheists and even progressive Christians have pointed out for years is that, Jesus talks a lot about caring for the least of these, the people who don't have a lot. And even Jesus talks about loving your neighbor, right? And what do conservative Christians do? They will cherry pick Bible verses to say, see, God doesn't like homosexuality. And they will use that to justify their bigotry against LGBTQ people. The Bible doesn't really say anything about abortion, but conservative Christians can always find verses that say abortion is evil for whatever reason. But here's a question for you. What about things that are not hot button culture war issues? How do they deal with that? So, for example, when it comes to fighting poverty, that doesn't seem like it should be that controversial, right? Like, there's no conservative position that says we should not be against poverty. Helping the poor seems to be one of the things everyone can get on board with, right? Right. I mean, of all the things Christianity is supposed to stand for, helping people with less, helping people with fewer resources should be near the top of the priority list, no matter the denomination, you would think, right? That is clearly not how many white evangelicals see it. There was a survey that came out in 2017. The Washington Post wrote about it. Let me show you the headline. This is from 2017. Christians are more than twice as likely to blame a person's poverty on lack of effort. And I just want to show you this little bit right here. This survey, Washington Post and the Kaiser Family Foundation, found that religion is a significant predictor of how Americans perceive poverty. Christians, especially white evangelical Christians, are much more likely than non-Christians to view poverty as the result of individual failings. And what's the problem with that? If they think you're poor because you did something wrong, then they probably are less inclined to want to help you. Like, this is, you got into this mess, you get yourself out of it, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, right? They don't really want to help you. But that was the article that came out years ago. So anyway, I was looking at some journals. This article crossed my path and I found it fascinating. This is a free article. You can totally read this online for free. It's in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion, which sounds like an oxymoron, but I swear, legit journal. And look at the title. I thank God we're rich, justifying economic inequality in an evangelical congregation. And it's written by someone named Dawson Vosburg. And I'm not going to read you a scientific paper, but basically, here's what happened. Vosburg is a Ph.D. candidate at the Ohio State University. And basically, Dawson was trying to understand how conservative Christians twist the Bible to downplay economic inequality. And here's how he did it, which I found really, really interesting. He picked out one particular Christian megachurch and he looked at every sermon they delivered between 2013 and 2023, over a decade. And he transcribed all their sermons. And this is one of the fastest growing megachurches in the country. And he transcribed everything and he said, let me do a search for every time they did a sermon where they used the word rich, tithe, debt, billionaire, millionaire, etc. Because I want to see, what is this church saying when they talk about money, right? That's one way of exploring this quintessential, very fast growing megachurch. How do they talk about wealth? And what does that say about evangelical Christianity at large? And I know we only looked at one church, not a million of them, but the paper, I thought, offered a really clear example of how conservative Christian pastors, white evangelical pastors, can convince their congregations to flat out ignore one of the biggest moral issues of our time. And here's the question Vosburg wanted to answer. How do evangelical teachers justify inequality even as they marshal and interpret the same religious scriptures and theological ideas used by others to condemn it? Plenty of Christians say, it's harder for a rich man to, I'm sorry, what is it? It's easier for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle I'm screwing it up. I'm sorry. Camel to go through the eye of a needle? I don't know. Then a rich man enter heaven? Sorry, screwed that one up. But there are plenty of Bible verses that talk about why you shouldn't hoard wealth. So how the hell do these same pastors use the Bible to say, no, wealth's not a big deal? That's the question he was trying to answer. So for the sake of the paper, he called this place New River Church, and he called the pastor Trey Jarrett, just a prototypical white pastor name. And here's what I took away from his paper. He said there were 4 ways this church downplayed wealth inequality. Thank you for this. It's easier for, damn it, I fell for it. Easier for a rich needle to go through a camel than for heaven to go through a man. You know what? Close enough. So, what were the 4 ways pastors downplayed wealth inequality? The first way they did it is they condemned shaming the rich. We will not speak ill of the very wealthy. Pastor Trey apparently made it very clear there's nothing wrong with having money. He loved it, and God loved it, and anybody calling for the abolition of billionaires, he was like very mad at you. And for example, check this out. I will show you this right here. In one of these sermons, at the pinnacle of this sermon, Pastor Trey remarked on how brief life is and how this means resources ought to be used to further Christianity. I thank God we're rich. I thank God that we now have thousandaires and millionaires and billionaires in the church. What we can accomplish together. So don't be mad at the billionaires, especially if they are our billionaires. He also told an anecdote to his church about a rich couple that decided to leave their old church and come to his because they felt they were being personally attacked at the old place. Because that old pastor condemned wealth from the pulpit. And this pastor, Trey Jarrett, he wanted you to know, hey, you are welcome in my church. Also, tithing is 10%, and I expect you to give to me, right? Like, of course, he welcomed the billionaire in his church, or however rich these people were, because he's going to get their money. Like, the moral was obvious. Be kind to the wealthy, or else they're going to go to a different church and not ours. And if the pastor ever criticized wealth, it was only to say that God is fine with you having money as long as you are using it for the right reasons. You should not let the money control your life. That would be bad. But if you have money, that's fine. Look at one of the quotations from one of the sermons here. There's nothing wrong. This is from the pastor. There's nothing wrong with owning a lake house. God gave it to you, and you should invite me over to your lake house. I would love to play in your pool. Nothing wrong with that. Just be careful. This pastor is like, I'm cool if you have money. Like, let me take advantage of some of that. But otherwise, he's fine with it. And here's the point. If you're giving sermons like this, it should not be surprising if this conversation defends the outrageous amounts of money hoarded by Elon Musk, by Jeff Bezos, by Donald Trump, because God must have wanted them to have it. Even if that wealth comes on the back of workers who have suffered, who continue to suffer. And of course, if you raise taxes on some of these same people, which is something Zoran Mamdani is saying he will do in New York City when he becomes mayor, that this congregation will see is an unnecessary punishment to people who God was just rewarding. Why would you do that to them? So that's method 1. They downplayed wealth inequality because they condemn shaming the rich. Here's number 2. How are they doing it? They downplayed U.S. inequality by focusing on global inequality. And this was an interesting one. I probably would not have guessed otherwise, but check this out. Let me pull this up here. There are currently over 36 million Americans living in poverty. And that's about 11% of our population. These are people for whom a financial emergency, a medical accident, they have to go to the hospital, it's going to destroy them. if they have an emergency. Have you heard those stats? Like some people don't have $400 to cover an emergency. That's who we're talking about here. They don't have permanent homes. And yet they did not, those people, those concerns were not really felt by the people at New River Church because their pastor always told them, all of you are rich, relatively speaking, anyway. Check this out. This is what he said. I'm going to give you some statistics to prove how rich you are. Number one, 3/4 of the world's population is living on $300 a year or less. If you earned more than $300 last year, you are a top 25%er. If you could see what God sees. Yeah, we're all concerned about what the other person has sitting next to us. But if you can see the whole world as God sees the whole world, you're kind of at the top. And if you earn more than $33,000 a year, you're a top 1%er when it comes to all the wealth earners in the world. Like, think about what he's saying there. If you make a little bit of money, you're richer than like globally poor people. And if you make like a one income, lower to middle class salary, you're like richer than pretty much everybody. So you guys, you're all rich. Poverty doesn't really exist. We're all super lucky because we're all rich. Even the poor people. Give me money. Like, why think about the poor when this guy is comparing you to poor people in other countries that you never see, and he's making you think you're doing pretty damn good? That's a very easy way for Christians to dismiss proposals like universal health care and free public transit and universal pre-K. Why do you need any of that stuff when all of you are rich already? Right? Maybe you don't understand why those things are necessary if you have no idea what low-income people actually have to struggle with on a day-to-day basis. And this church never bothered to make that clear. Like, poverty doesn't really exist in their church. Real poverty exists elsewhere. Plus, everybody's rich when they have Jesus, right? Okay, that was number two. Here's number three, the way they're downplaying wealth inequality. They twisted Bible verses about poverty, even the ones that are very clearly against the rich. Okay, so whether we're talking about the Beatitudes or other parts of the gospel, one of the things Jesus talks a lot about, because it's not gay people, it is the value of preaching to the poor, for they are blessed. Right? But at New River, that is not how they interpreted those verses. One of the things this pastor said about Jesus talking about the impoverished, look at this. By poor, he means the spiritually impoverished. He's not talking about financially poor people. He's talking about spiritually impoverished people. You guys, Jesus wasn't talking about the people with no money. He was talking about atheists. Oh my God. What about when you're supposed to take things literally? Like, the weird thing that Vosburg found in his paper is that this church took the Bible literally a whole bunch of times, as long as they were not talking about money. When it was about money, they were like, this is subject to interpretation. Everything else is literal, but not the money stuff. There is even, one of the reasons they do this is because I think this church really wants you to give 10%. So when the Bible talks about tithing, they want to make clear that is not subject to interpretation. That is a literal thing. But when Jesus says help the poor, no, that's talking about atheists. That's not talking about people with no money. This was check this one out. Only passages which can be read as challenging wealth, emphasizing the goodness of the poor, or criticizing inequality receive the spiritualization treatment. The tithe law is interpreted to mean congregants' actual dollars, not just their inward dispositions. Beautifully put. And the final way they downplayed wealth inequality in this church is they said, who cares what you have? God owns everything anyway. It doesn't matter how much stuff you have, because ultimately it's all God's. So don't be mad at people with private jets and yachts and multiple summer homes. It's not theirs. It's God's. And if some people have less stuff, it's only because God wants you to have less stuff. Check out this Bible verse right here. This is James, the book of James, chapter 5. Look at the beginning of this chapter. Now listen, you rich people. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Now, as a casual reader, that sounds like it's pretty direct of a commentary against rich people for many reasons. Now, how did they talk about that verse at this church? Look at what they did here. Here we go. Here's what Vosburg wrote. When this is clarified when Pastor Trey is presented with the text of James 5, which puts the accumulation of wealth in the context of injustice. He interprets it this way. Don't use the blessing of wealth in your life that God has given you as an oppressive tool over those who are less fortunate. Which is nice, but like even in highlighting the possibility of oppression related to wealth, his wording makes it clear that he in no way thinks that the accumulation of that wealth was unjust. Quite the opposite, right? It's very clear in that Bible verse, God has a problem with people who are hoarding the wealth, not what they're doing with it, the mere fact that they have it. But that is not how they interpreted it at this church. In fact, in one sermon that Vosburg wrote about, this pastor lashed out at people for criticizing a hypothetical billionaire who only makes $1 million donation. If you're a billionaire who makes a $1 million donation, you are giving 0.1% of your wealth away. That's nothing. And what did this pastor say about that? Stop worrying about what somebody else has. You be faithful with what you have. Which might be good advice out of context, but in context, he is telling the congregation to lay off rich people who could be doing more to help the less fortunate, but have chosen not to do that. Like the takeaway from all this is that the conservative policies that benefit the ultra wealthy, the policies that Republicans are currently advocating for and have basically always advocated for, they are going to be supported by congregations like this one who are being brainwashed into thinking God loves the rich and the poor deserve whatever shit life they have. Now, after I read this paper, I reached out to Vosburg, who wrote this, Dawson Vosburg, who wrote this, and I asked him, listen, in 10 years of studying this church and these sermons, did you see anything or hear anything that contradicted that narrative? Or are you cherry picking? Like, did you find this church saying taxing the rich was a good idea, or that like we should actually help the financially poor? And Vosburg said no. Like the only thing he ever heard to the contrary was encouraging people to help the less fortunate. But even then, he put it in the context of give our church money so we can help the less fortunate. If you're urging people to tithe, though, that kind of has a selfish aspect to it. For what it's worth, I found this interesting too. Vosburg told me he is a lifelong evangelical who has become more progressive over the years, starting when he was a teenager, but he is a faithful Christian. But he told me he is troubled by the way people are willing to justify inequality and domination using the language of faith. And I don't think any of that tainted this research. It just, that explains why he was interested in this topic. And honestly, I am grateful that he is now making me more aware of the coded language they are using at these churches. I happen to think this is a betrayal of what Jesus taught in the Bible. It's a betrayal for the sake of power and profit. Pastors like this one, they hollow out the teachings of Jesus until all that's left is the wealthy to do whatever they want. Scripture is nothing but a way for these people to like shame the poor, protect billionaires, keep their congregations quiet while inequality grows all around them. And they're kind of doing to inequality, wealth inequality, what they've done to so many other social issues. They downplay empathy and decency, and they promote faith-based cruelty, right? This is just a Christian cover for a rigged economy. It's like what Bernie Sanders would, If Bernie Sanders was a preacher, this is like the anti-Bernie. It's a prosperity gospel pep talk for people who are already doing fine. Now, I will add one thing that is not in that paper. All right. I read through that paper. It's good. I will have a link for you in the notes if you want to read it. Vosburg went out of his way not to name and shame the church and the pastor. I will say it was not hard for me to do a little Googling. And, I already knew what the names of the sermons were because he listed them. I already knew what to look for in the sermons because he quoted them directly. And I will just tell you, I found the name of the church and I will absolutely name and shame them. It's Rock City Church in Hilliard, Ohio, run by this dude, Chad Fisher, which is the most white evangelical pastor name ever. This is the church that Vosburg was studying. But again, he chose this one not because it's unique, but because it's not. It's just another fast-growing white evangelical megachurch. And if this is the way they're treating wealth inequality, you can fully expect this is the way a lot of white evangelical churches are treating wealth inequality. I will leave it at that. What questions we got here? Thank you for that donation. Christian nonprofit charities do not make religion a net positive when they create the need for the charities in the first place. Also just got me to listen to the Book of Mormon today. Hello, that's fantastic. But yeah, like there are Christian nonprofits and they do a very good job. They do good work. But if your church is just contributing to the problems, are you really helping? No, like don't create a problem and then pretend you're the solution. That's kind of what religion does already, right? They make up things that are sins and they say, you know what you need to fix the sins? It's whatever it is we're selling you. They create the problem, they present themselves as the solution. That's kind of how religion works. These pastors are all using the same script to calm their congregation. It's an international phenomena. I always find it very interesting to watch these white evangelical preachers because they're always trying to one-up each other and they always try to find new ways of doing it. But as this paper points out, maybe the words change, but the basic way they do it, the methods they are using are very much the same. I mean, conservative Christian megachurches, white evangelical megachurches, have not unfairly been compared to like McDonald's franchises. You can go to anyone you want and know what to expect. And that's why you could study any one of these churches and come away thinking, I kind of know about a lot of these churches because they all kind of function the same way. They spread best practices. This is what works. This is what gets butts in seats. You got to have the modern music and comfy chairs and make it an experience. And that's why a lot of teens get hooked into it. It's like, oh, this is the cool church. I want to come here. That's how they get you. People like him say our homeless people are richer than starving kids in Africa, so they have no right to complain. Yes, that is one of the points they were making. It doesn't matter what you're going through. It doesn't matter if you're suffering. Other people have it worse, so shut up. I mean, that's very much what that pastor was saying. Is there any scripture that they follow that would be considered humanist or loving to others? The funny thing is, if you go to a progressive Christian church, yes, there are plenty of Bible verses that even secular atheist people could quote and say, this is a good moral lesson. It is not hard to find good moral lessons in the Bible, in the Quran, in any holy book, but you got to look at it in context. Like, it's not like you only can get that information from holy books. But that's the thing. These people are very clearly choosing what they want to quote, how they want to interpret it. And so if they want to do really nasty things with the Bible, spread really horrible conservative policies, it's not hard to do that. It's a choice, and they have made their decision. I remember this rich Christian friend I had. I was hurt that God blessed her more than me. She said, I'm not going to let you compare your life to mine like that. Yee. Yeah, no love like that, huh? Yeah, that's yikes. Why can't you compare your life to hers? I don't know. I'm also wondering why Christian is in quotation marks. I don't know if she's a fake Christian just because she treats you like that. But the lack of empathy, man. The next story I'm going to do concerns empathy. But yeah, I'm sorry you had that friend in your life, but I'm not really sorry you lost her.